What's a moment that forced you to fight fire with fire? I thought landing my dream job at Meridian Tech was the beginning of everything I'd worked for. Fresh out of college, decent salary, great benefits, and a chance to work with cutting-edge software development. My manager Corbin seemed genuinely excited to have me on the team. "You're going to love it here," he said during my first week. "We're like family." That should have been my first red flag. Everything was perfect for exactly 3 weeks. Then Damien transferred to our department. Damien was one of those guys who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. Tall, confident, with the kind of smile that made you trust him instantly. He had 5 years of experience and a reputation for delivering results. Within days, he was Corbin's golden boy. The sabotage started small. My code would mysteriously develop bugs overnight. Files I'd been working on would disappear from the shared drive. During team meetings, Damien would interrupt me mid-sentence with a concerned look. "I think what he's trying to say is," he'd begin, then explain my own idea better than I had. Corbin would nod approvingly. "Great insight, Damien." I tried brushing it off. New guy paranoia, I told myself. But then my project presentation started glitching. The slides I'd tested the night before would suddenly have formatting errors or missing images. I'd stand there, embarrassed, while Damien helpfully offered to take over. "Technical difficulties happen," he'd say with that perfect smile. "Let me help you out." The worst part? He'd fix everything seamlessly, making me look incompetent while he appeared like a hero. One morning, I arrived to find my computer had been remotely accessed at 3 a.m. All my current project files were corrupted. When I mentioned it to Corbin, he suggested I should back up my work more carefully. "Damien never has these issues," he said, glancing at his golden boy. That's when I realized this wasn't random. Damien was systematically destroying my reputation. I started staying late, installing monitoring software on my computer, documenting every suspicious incident. I found keystroke logs, evidence of remote access, deleted emails that would have exposed his interference. The pattern was undeniable. I took everything to HR. Victoria, the HR director, listened patiently as I laid out months of evidence. "This is serious," she said, reviewing my documentation. "We'll investigate immediately." 2 days later, Damien cornered me in the break room. "Heard you've been spreading some interesting stories about me," he said, his voice calm but his eyes cold. "That's not very team player behavior." The next week, I was written up for missing deadlines I'd never been given. Victoria called me into her office with a formal warning about my disruptive workplace behavior and making unfounded accusations against colleagues. "Sometimes new employees struggle with the transition," she said. "Perhaps you'd benefit from our employee assistance program." I stared at her in disbelief. Damien had gotten to her too. That evening, my desk neighbor Tessa pulled me aside. "Be careful," she whispered. "Damien's done this before." The last guy who tried to report him ended up fired for cause. No severance, no unemployment, nothing. My blood ran cold. How many people has he done this to? 3 that I know of. He targets people who might threaten his position, makes them look incompetent, then swoops in to save the day. I went home that night and did something I'd never done before. I Googled Damien's employment history. 3 previous companies in 5 years. Each time he'd left right after someone else was terminated. The breaking point came during our quarterly review presentation. I'd spent weeks preparing, triple-checking everything, even recording myself practicing. This was my chance to prove my worth. The presentation started perfectly. My slides were flawless, my delivery confident. Halfway through, the screen went black. "Technical difficulties," Damien announced, standing up with a concerned expression. "Don't worry, I have a backup presentation ready." He pulled up an exact replica of my presentation, except with his name on it. I couldn't fit what happens next in this short video. Watch the rest down below. Full version, complete expanded story. What's a moment that forced you to fight fire with fire? I thought landing my dream job at Meridian Tech was the beginning of everything I'd worked for. Fresh out of college, decent salary, great benefits, and a chance to work with cutting-edge software development. My manager Corbin seemed genuinely excited to have me on the team. "You're going to love it here," he said during my first week. "We're like family." That should have been my first red flag. Everything was perfect for exactly 3 weeks. Then Damien transferred to our department. Damien was one of those guys who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. Tall, confident, with a kind of smile that made you trust him instantly. He had 5 years of experience and a reputation for delivering results. Within days, he was Corbin's golden boy. The sabotage started small. My code would mysteriously develop bugs overnight. Files I'd been working on would disappear from the shared drive. During team meetings, Damien would interrupt me mid-sentence with a concerned look. "I think what he's trying to say is," he'd begin, then explain my own idea better than I had. Corbin would nod approvingly. "Great insight, Damien." I tried brushing it off. New guy paranoia, I told myself. But then my project presentation started glitching. The slides I'd tested the night before would suddenly have formatting errors or missing images. I'd stand there embarrassed while Damien helpfully offered to take over. "Technical difficulties happen," he'd say with that perfect smile. "Let me help you out." The worst part? He'd fix everything seamlessly, making me look incompetent while he appeared like a hero. One morning, I arrived to find my computer had been remotely accessed at 3 a.m. All my current project files were corrupted. When I mentioned it to Corbin, he suggested I should back up my work more carefully. "Damien never has these issues," he said, glancing at his golden boy. That's when I realized this wasn't random. Damien was systematically destroying my reputation. I started staying late, installing monitoring software on my computer, documenting every suspicious incident. I found keystroke logs, evidence of remote access, deleted emails that would have exposed his interference. The pattern was undeniable. I took everything to HR. Victoria, the HR director, listened patiently as I laid out months of evidence. "This is serious," she said, reviewing my documentation. "We'll investigate immediately." 2 days later, Damien cornered me in the break room. "Heard you've been spreading some interesting stories about me," he said, his voice calm but his eyes cold. "That's not very team player behavior." The next week, I was written up for missing deadlines. Deadlines I'd never been given. Victoria called me into her office with a formal warning about my disruptive workplace behavior and making unfounded accusations against colleagues. "Sometimes new employees struggle with the transition," she said. "Perhaps you'd benefit from our employee assistance program?" I stared at her in disbelief. Damien had gotten to her too. That evening, my desk neighbor Tessa pulled me aside. "Be careful," she whispered. "Damien's done this before. The last guy who tried to report him ended up fired for cause. No severance, no unemployment, nothing." My blood ran cold. "How many people has he done this to?" "3 that I know of. He targets people who might threaten his position, makes them look incompetent, then swoops in to save the day." I went home that night and did something I'd never done before. I Googled Damien's employment history. 3 previous companies in 5 years. Each time, he'd left right after someone else was terminated. The breaking point came during our quarterly review presentation. I'd spent weeks preparing, triple-checking everything, even recording myself practicing. This was my chance to prove my worth. The presentation started perfectly. My slides were flawless, my delivery confident. Halfway through, the screen went black. "Technical difficulties," Damien announced, standing up with a concerned expression. "Don't worry, I have a backup presentation ready." He pulled up an exact replica of my presentation, except with his name on it. The room fell silent. I stood there, frozen, watching as Damien delivered my months of research, my analysis, my recommendations, all credited to him. Corbin and the other managers nodded along, impressed by Damien's thoroughness. "Questions?" Damien asked, wrapping up my presentation with a confident smile. One of the executives raised her hand. "This is exactly the innovation we need. Damien, how soon can you implement this strategy?" My stomach dropped. Not only had he stolen my work, but he was about to get the promotion I'd been working toward. "I can have the first phase deployed by month end," he replied smoothly. That's when something inside me snapped. I tried playing by the rules. I documented everything, followed proper channels, trusted the system, and where had it gotten me? Humiliated in front of the entire leadership team while watching a sociopath steal my career. If Damien wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what dirty really looked like. I raised my hand. "Actually, I'd like to add something to this presentation." Damien's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "I think we've covered everything." "This is fascinating work," I interrupted, looking directly at the executive who'd asked about implementation. "Damien, could you walk us through the specific methodology you used for the market analysis in slide 14? There was no slide 14 in his stolen version. Damien cleared his throat. "Well, the methodology was fairly standard." "Really? Because I found the regression analysis particularly innovative. How did you account for seasonal variance in the dataset?" His eyes darted to his laptop. "There was no regression analysis in the version he'd stolen, because I'd saved the advanced statistical work in a separate file. The seasonal adjustments were comprehensive," he said, sweat beginning to show on his forehead. I smiled the same predatory smile I'd watched him use for months. "Could you show us the correlation matrices? I'd love to see your approach to the multivariate analysis." Corbin looked confused. "What matrices?" Damien's face had gone pale. "I think we should move on to implementation planning." No, I said, my voice getting stronger. "This is the meat of the research. Damien, you mentioned in your presentation that customer retention showed a significant correlation with engagement metrics. What was the R-squared value you calculated?" Complete silence. Damien looked like a deer in headlights. That's when I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the projector. "I apologize for the confusion," I announced to the room. "It seems like there's been a technical error. Let me show you the complete presentation, including the appendices with all the statistical analysis Damien was referencing." I pulled up my real presentation. The room immediately recognized the difference. My version had depth, nuance, detailed charts and graphs that showed months of careful analysis. What Damien had stolen was just the summary slides, the pretty face without the brain behind it. "As you can see," I continued, clicking through complex data visualizations that clearly showed my analytical approach. "The correlation between customer engagement and retention required advanced multivariate analysis to account for confounding variables." The executives leaned forward, suddenly engaged with the real substance they'd been missing. "The R-squared value I achieved was 0.847, indicating a very strong predictive relationship," I explained, pointing to charts that Damien couldn't possibly understand, let alone explain. Damien tried to interject. "I think there's been some confusion." "Oh, absolutely," I agreed. "Damien, since this is your research, you wouldn't mind explaining to the team how you handled the heteroscedasticity in your regression model?" The word hung in the air like a challenge. I might as well have asked him to explain quantum physics in ancient Greek. The heteroscedasticity was addressed through standard protocols," he stammered. "Standard protocols?" I pressed. "Could you be more specific? Did you use weighted least squares? Or did you transform the variables? The team should understand your methodology if they're going to implement it. The room was starting to catch on. Corbin's expression had shifted from confusion to suspicion. One of the senior developers was smirking. Damien made one last desperate attempt. Perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting to dive into technical details. Actually, interrupted the executive who'd been most impressed, I'd like to understand this methodology now. This level of analysis could revolutionize how we approach market research. She turned to me. Could you walk us through your process? For the next hour, I presented the real work. Not just pretty slides, but the deep analytical thinking that had gone into every recommendation. I explained statistical concepts, showed my data sources, demonstrated the custom algorithms I'd written to process the information. I walked them through my data collection methodology, explaining how I'd identified and contacted over 2,000 customers across 17 different market segments. I showed them the survey instruments I'd designed, the response rates I'd achieved, and the validation techniques I'd used to ensure data quality. The beauty of this approach, I explained, clicking to a slide showing response distribution patterns, is that we can identify microtrends within specific customer cohorts that traditional broad-stroke surveys completely miss. I demonstrated the machine learning model I'd built to predict customer churn, showing how it had achieved 89% accuracy in beta testing. The room was captivated as I explained the feature engineering process, the cross-validation techniques, and the bias detection algorithms I'd implemented. This customer lifetime value predictor, I continued, pointing to a complex visualization, doesn't just tell us who might leave, it tells us why, when, and what intervention strategies are most likely to retain them. Damien sat frozen in his chair, watching his perfect scheme crumble in real time. Every technical question directed his way revealed another gap in his understanding. When the lead data scientist asked about my approach to handling class imbalance in the training data, Damien's response about standard sampling techniques was so vague it was embarrassing. But I wasn't done, not even close. I pulled up a timeline showing my work process. This project actually started 8 months ago, I explained. Let me walk you through the evolution of my thinking. I showed early prototypes, failed experiments, iterative improvements. The presentation became a masterclass in analytical problem solving. I explained how I'd identified flaws in our existing customer segmentation model, developed hypotheses about engagement patterns, and systematically tested each assumption. The breakthrough came when I realized we were thinking about customer engagement all wrong, I said, clicking to a before and after comparison. Traditional models treat engagement as a single metric, but customer behavior is actually driven by multiple, sometimes conflicting motivations. I demonstrated how I'd developed a multi-dimensional engagement scoring system that could predict not just whether a customer would remain loyal, but which specific products they'd be interested in and when. The pilot test results speak for themselves, I concluded, showing a slide with impressive performance metrics. 23% increase in customer retention, 31% improvement in upselling success rate, and a 45% reduction in support ticket escalations. The room erupted in questions. Technical questions, implementation questions, questions about scaling the model to other product lines. I answered each one with detailed knowledge that made it impossible to doubt who had actually done the work. After the presentation, as people filed out congratulating me on impressive work, I approached Damien with the same helpful smile he'd used on me for months. That was quite a presentation, I said quietly. But I think you might have made a small error. His jaw was clenched. What are you talking about? Well, presenting someone else's work as your own. That's a fireable offense, isn't it? I mean, that's what you told HR about me supposedly stealing your ideas. The color drained from his face. I have no idea what you mean, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and showed him a video recording. I've been recording all my presentation prep sessions for weeks. Here's me practicing this exact presentation in my apartment last Sunday. Time-stamped, of course. His eyes widened as he watched himself on my screen, stealing files from my computer the night before the meeting. How did you? The same monitoring software you taught me to use, I said sweetly. Turns out it works both ways. I've got 6 months of recordings showing you accessing my computer, stealing my files, sabotaging my work. All time-stamped, all documented. But that wasn't all I had. While Damien had been busy stealing my presentation, I'd been busy building a much bigger case. See, I'd started connecting with other employees, not just at Meridian, but at his previous companies. The pattern was always the same. Identify a talented target, systematically undermine their work, steal their ideas, then watch them get fired while he swooped in to claim credit. You should know, I continued, I've been in touch with Garrett from TechFlow Solutions. He was very interested to learn that his performance issues weren't actually performance issues at all. Damien's face went white. You can't prove, can I interrupted, because Garrett kept copies of his original work. And when he compared his stolen ideas to the presentations you gave after he was fired, well, let's just say the similarities are remarkable. I'd spent 2 weeks building connections with Damien's previous victims. Garrett had been the easiest to find. His LinkedIn showed a 6-month gap in employment after TechFlow, followed by a series of contract positions. When I reached out, he was initially hesitant to talk. But when I described what was happening to me, his entire demeanor changed. Jesus, he'd said over our video call. I thought I was losing my mind. The exact same thing happened to me. Garrett introduced me to Wesley, who'd been the victim before him. Wesley connected me to Priya, who'd experienced Damien's sabotage at an earlier company. The pattern was identical across all 4 cases. Identify a threat, isolate them, steal their work, destroy their reputation, watch them get fired. But here's what Damien hadn't counted on. All 4 of us were good at our jobs. Really good. And we'd all documented our work thoroughly. Priya was particularly helpful, I told Damien, watching his face grow paler. She saved everything. Every email, every file version, every communication log. She's been waiting 3 years for someone to validate what happened to her. The truth was, I'd been planning this confrontation for weeks, not just the presentation. That was just the opening move. I'd been building a comprehensive case that would ensure Damien could never do this to anyone else. Oh, and there's one more thing, I added casually. Remember that friendly chat you had with Director Patterson last month? About my attitude problems and how I wasn't management material? Damien's eyes went wide. Patterson was the regional director, 2 levels above Corbin. I thought you should know. Patterson is Priya's uncle. Funny how small the world is, isn't it? That wasn't entirely true. Patterson wasn't Priya's uncle, but he was her former mentor at her previous company. When Priya reached out to him about Damien's pattern of behavior, Patterson had been very interested to learn that the same employee had shown up at Meridian and was reportedly engaging in the same tactics. Patterson had been quietly monitoring the situation ever since, waiting for Damien to make a mistake big enough to justify action. Stealing a presentation in front of the entire executive team definitely qualified. Damien looked around desperately, but the conference room was empty, except for us. What do you want? He whispered. Nothing, I said. I already got what I wanted, but you should know. I've scheduled a meeting with Victoria tomorrow morning. I'm bringing printed copies of every remote access log, every stolen file, every piece of evidence I've been collecting. You can't prove anything, he said, but there was panic in his voice. Can I? I pulled up another file on my phone. Remember when you helpfully fixed my corrupted presentation last month? I have screen recordings of you deliberately corrupting it first, and then fixing it to look like a hero. I swiped to another video. Here's you accessing my email at 2 a.m. to delete the message thread where Corbin actually gave me those deadlines you said I missed. His hands were shaking now. And my personal favorite, I continued, the recording of you bragging to someone on the phone about how easy it was to manipulate the new kid and how you'd have me fired within 6 months. I'd made that last one up, but his face told me I'd hit close enough to the truth. Please, he said quietly. I need this job. I have a mortgage, car payments. Funny, I said. That's exactly what you said about Garrett before you got him fired. And Wesley. And Priya. His face went white. How do you know those names? I called them. All 3 of your previous victims. Turns out they're very interested in sharing their experiences with a lawyer who specializes in workplace harassment cases. That was partially true. I'd found Garrett on LinkedIn, and he'd confirmed Damien's pattern, though we hadn't talked to any lawyers yet. But the threat was enough to make Damien's remaining composure crumble completely. They're willing to testify about your methods, I continued. Multiple victims, same pattern of behavior. That's what lawyers call a slam dunk case. Damien slumped into a chair. What do you want me to do? Nothing, I said. Just sit back and watch. But I wasn't done with my planning. That evening, I spent 4 hours on a conference call with Garrett, Wesley, and Priya, coordinating our stories and evidence. Each of them had been keeping documentation, hoping someday they'd get a chance for justice. Garrett had been unemployed for 8 months after TechFlow fired him. The experience had shattered his confidence so completely that he'd started questioning his own abilities. He'd spent his savings on therapy, trying to understand what had gone wrong. I kept thinking I was a fraud, he told us, that maybe I really wasn't as good as I thought. Damien was so convincing, so helpful. He made me feel like everything wrong was my fault. Wesley's story was even worse. After losing his job, he'd spiraled into depression and started drinking heavily. His marriage had nearly ended. He'd only recently gotten back on his feet with a new position, but the self-doubt lingered. He stole more than my work, Wesley said. He stole my faith in myself. Priya had been the strongest of the 3, which made sense. She'd been in the industry longer and had more experience recognizing toxic behavior. But even she'd been damaged by the experience. The worst part wasn't losing the job, she explained. It was having my own manager look me in the eye and tell me I was imagining things, that my concerns about Damien were misplaced, and I needed to be more collaborative. Listening to their stories reinforced my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about stopping a predator who'd been systematically destroying careers for years. The next morning, I walked into Victoria's office with a flash drive containing everything. But I didn't go alone. Tessa came with me, along with 2 other colleagues who'd witnessed Damien's behavior but had been too afraid to speak up. I believe I owe you an apology, Victoria said after reviewing the evidence. This is far more serious than I initially understood. But Victoria's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. When they started digging into Damien's computer activity, they found evidence of much more than workplace sabotage. IT discovered that Damien had been systematically collecting proprietary information from every department he'd worked in. Client lists, pricing strategies, product roadmaps, algorithm specifications, everything was being copied to an external drive. This isn't just workplace harassment, Victoria told me during a follow-up meeting. This is industrial espionage. The investigation expanded beyond HR into corporate security. They brought in external investigators, forensic accountants, even cybersecurity experts. What they found painted a picture of a sophisticated operation. Damien had been selling information to competitors for over 2 years. The revenue from those sales explained how he could afford his expensive lifestyle despite frequent job changes. More importantly, it explained why he was so good at manipulating workplace politics. He had practiced lying professionally. The pattern is clear, the lead investigator explained to a room full of executives. He joins companies, identifies high-value targets, usually talented employees working on sensitive projects, then systematically destroys their credibility while stealing their work and the company's confidential information. The financial impact was staggering. 3 major client relationships had been lost to competitors who somehow knew Meridian's exact pricing strategies. A product launch had been preempted by a rival who'd released an almost identical solution 6 months earlier. In total, the estimated damage exceeded $8 million. The investigation took 3 days. By day 2, Corbin had figured out which way the wind was blowing and distanced himself from his former golden boy. By day 3, Damien's keycard had been deactivated. But the real satisfaction came when I learned about the domino effect. See, when Meridian's legal team contacted Damien's previous employers with evidence of his information theft, they discovered he'd been running the same scam for years. Each company had suffered mysterious competitive disadvantages shortly after he left. Client poaching, pricing undercuts, product roadmap theft, the pattern was consistent. What started as workplace bullying turned into a multi-company investigation involving corporate espionage charges, federal law enforcement, and damages in the tens of millions. The last time I saw Damien, he was being escorted out by security with a box of his personal belongings and 2 FBI agents flanking him. As he passed my desk, he stopped and looked at me. "You destroyed my life," he said quietly. I looked up from my computer where I was working on the promotion proposal I'd earned through my own merit. "No," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you destroy mine." The criminal case moved quickly. With evidence from 4 companies and testimony from multiple victims, Damien's defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to corporate espionage, computer fraud, and racketeering charges. The sentencing hearing was surreal. I sat in the courtroom gallery with Garrett, Wesley, and Priya, watching as the man who'd terrorized all of us stood before a federal judge. "Your actions represent a calculated pattern of professional predation," the judge said. "You systematically destroyed careers, stole intellectual property, and caused millions of dollars in damages across multiple companies." Damien received 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution payments to 4 companies totaling $12.3 million. His assets were seized, his professional certifications revoked, and he was banned from working in the technology industry. But the part that satisfied me most wasn't his downfall. It was hearing from Garrett, Wesley, and Priya about their recovery. Garrett got a new job at a tech startup and sent me a thank you card when he got his first promotion in 4 years. The validation that he hadn't been crazy, that there had been a real predator systematically destroying his confidence, helped him rebuild his self-esteem. "I spent 2 years thinking I was a failure," he wrote. "Finding out the truth literally saved my career." Wesley started therapy and rebuilt his career. He got sober, repaired his marriage, and took a position at a consulting firm where his innovative approaches to data analysis earned him rapid promotions. "I thought I'd lost my edge," he told me during a follow-up call. "Turns out, I just needed to remember that my ideas were actually mine." Priya actually joined our company as a consultant and became one of my closest colleagues. Her experience with Damien had made her an expert at recognizing workplace manipulation, and she helped us develop training programs to prevent similar situations. "The best revenge," she said during one of our project meetings, "is not just stopping the predator, it's making sure they can never do it again to anyone else." 6 months later, I got promoted to senior analyst. Corbin publicly acknowledged that my market research had resulted in a 23% increase in customer retention. The algorithm I developed became the foundation for a new product line that brought in $2.3 million in revenue its first year. But the promotion came with an unexpected responsibility. Because of my experience with Damien, I was asked to head up a new initiative on workplace security and ethical conduct. The role involved developing policies to prevent workplace sabotage, training managers to recognize toxic behavior patterns, and creating support systems for employees who reported misconduct. "Your experience gives you unique insight into these issues," the CEO explained during my promotion meeting. "We want to make sure nothing like this ever happens here again." The irony wasn't lost on me. Damien's attempts to destroy my career had actually led to the most meaningful work I'd ever done. I started by implementing mandatory training for all managers on recognizing and responding to workplace harassment. We developed anonymous reporting systems, regular check-ins for new employees, and clear protocols for investigating misconduct allegations. But the most important change was cultural. We established a principle that any employee raising concerns about colleague behavior would be protected and taken seriously. No more dismissing complaints as personality conflicts or telling victims to be more collaborative. "Trust but verify" became our motto. When someone reported unusual behavior, we investigated. When patterns emerged, we acted. When evidence was clear, we prosecuted. The program became a model for other companies. I was invited to speak at conferences, write articles for industry publications, and consult with organizations dealing with similar issues. 3 years later, I still work at Meridian. I'm now the department manager, and I've implemented policies to prevent workplace sabotage and protect employees from predatory colleagues. Every new hire gets a presentation about recognizing and reporting workplace harassment. The conference room where Damien tried to steal my presentation has been renamed the Innovation Lab. There's a plaque on the wall that reads, "Excellence cannot be faked, borrowed, or stolen. It must be earned." I think about that plaque every time I walk past it. But the real test of our new systems came 2 years after Damien's conviction. A new employee, Kevin, started exhibiting concerning behavior patterns. He was charming, helpful, and seemed to make other people's work mysteriously disappear right before deadlines. The old system would have ignored the warning signs until it was too late. But our new protocols caught the pattern early. Within 6 weeks, we had documented evidence of Kevin accessing colleagues' files without permission and taking credit for their ideas in team meetings. Kevin was terminated before he could cause serious damage. More importantly, his targets were supported and protected throughout the process. No one's career was destroyed. No one was made to feel crazy or incompetent. "The system works," Tessa said after Kevin's termination. "We actually protected people this time. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about how aggressively I went after Damien, if I think I went too far. The answer is no. Not for a second. For months, I'd tried to take the high road. I'd documented everything, followed proper procedures, trusted that the system would protect me. All it did was enable a predator to continue his pattern. Some people only understand one language, their own. Damien had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation, sabotage, and psychological warfare. He'd counted on his victims being too decent, too rule-following, too naive to fight back on his level. He was wrong. The moment I realized I had to fight fire with fire wasn't when he stole my presentation. It was when I understood that playing fair in an unfair system just makes you an easier target. I didn't become like Damien. I became someone who could beat him at his own game without losing my soul in the process. And sometimes, that's exactly what justice looks like. But the story doesn't end with Damien's conviction. The real victory was what came after. The systems we built, the culture we changed, the people we protected. Last month, I received an email from a young programmer at a startup in Seattle. She'd heard about our workplace protection protocols and wanted advice on implementing something similar at her company. "We have someone here exhibiting the same patterns you described in your conference presentation," she wrote. "But now I know what to look for and how to document it properly." 2 weeks later, she sent an update. Their HR department had investigated and found evidence of the employee stealing code and undermining colleagues. He was terminated, and the company implemented new monitoring and reporting systems based on our model. "You probably saved several careers," she wrote, "including mine." That's when I realized the fight wasn't just about stopping Damien. It was about changing an entire system that allowed predators like him to thrive. The industry conference circuit became a platform for spreading awareness. I started giving presentations titled "Recognizing and Stopping Workplace Predators," sharing tactical advice for identifying manipulation tactics and building evidence for investigations. The response was overwhelming. After every presentation, dozens of people would approach me with their own stories. Some were current victims seeking advice. Others were survivors sharing their experiences. A few were managers trying to protect their teams. "I thought I was the only one," was the most common comment I heard. "I thought I was going crazy." The presentations led to a book deal. Fighting Fire with Fire, a survival guide for workplace predators, became a bestseller in the business category. The book provided practical frameworks for recognizing toxic behavior, building documentation, and protecting yourself and others. But more importantly, it created a community. Readers started connecting with each other, sharing strategies, and coordinating responses to workplace predators. What started as my personal fight against Damien became a movement. The book's success led to a consulting practice. Companies started hiring me to evaluate their workplace cultures, identify potential issues, and implement protective systems. Each engagement reinforced the same truth. Predators like Damien were everywhere, but they could be stopped if organizations had the right tools and mindset. 5 years after Damien's conviction, I left Meridian to focus full-time on this work. My consulting firm now employs 12 people, including Garrett, Wesley, and Priya. We've worked with over 200 companies, trained thousands of managers, and developed software tools that help organizations monitor for predatory behavior patterns. The work is deeply satisfying in ways I never expected. Every successful intervention feels like a small victory against the system that almost destroyed my career. But the most meaningful moment came during a recent client engagement at a Fortune 500 company. I was training their management team when a young woman approached me afterward. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. "6 months ago, I was ready to quit the industry because of someone like your Damien. But my manager had read your book and recognized what was happening. They stopped it before it destroyed my career." She paused, tears in her eyes. "I love my job again. I thought that would never be possible." That's when I understood the true impact of fighting fire with fire. It wasn't just about personal survival. It was about creating a world where predators couldn't thrive, where victims were believed and protected, where talent was valued over manipulation. Damien is scheduled for release next year. His 5-year sentence, reduced for good behavior, will end with him returning to a very different world. The industry he once terrorized has new safeguards, better awareness, and zero tolerance for his tactics. He'll find that his methods no longer work. Companies now know what to look for. Managers are trained to spot manipulation. Victims have support systems and clear reporting channels. Most importantly, he'll discover that his victims didn't just survive, they thrived. Garrett is now a senior architect at a major tech company. Wesley runs his own successful consulting firm. Priya was recently promoted to VP of Engineering at a startup that's developing revolutionary AI systems. And me? I'm doing work that matters, protecting people who deserve better, and ensuring that predators like Damien can never again use the system to destroy innocent careers. Sometimes fighting fire with fire doesn't mean becoming the monster. Sometimes it means refusing to be a victim and using every tool at your disposal to protect yourself and others. Damien taught me that lesson well. I just learned it better than he did. The conference room where this all started still bears its plaque. Excellence cannot be faked, borrowed, or stolen. It must be earned. But now it's accompanied by another one. I added, when the system fails to protect you, become the system that protects others. That's the real victory. Not just surviving Damien's attack, but transforming that survival into something that protects countless others from experiencing the same trauma. The fire I fought with wasn't revenge. It was justice. And justice, when properly applied, doesn't just stop the current predator. It builds barriers that prevent future ones from succeeding. In the end, Damien did me a favor. He taught me that nice people don't always finish last, but only if they're smart enough to stop being nice when the situation demands it. And sometimes, that's the most important lesson of all.